I have are Eleni or Carmen. Are they somewhere here? I'm Rod Schröder. I'm the moderator, but I'm desperately still searching for one of the speakers. It's not the case, but I suggest we are going to start. And the first speaker will be Sarah Bird from the UK, and she is telling us something from her experience with time banking in the UK. Sarah has been active for Timebank UK for many years, since 2008, I think. And prior to that, she has been working on the ground as a practical time broker. So I think we can be very curious to learn from her experience. It's your turn.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yep, good. So I just wanted to share some of the experiences that is happening in the UK with regards to time banking, telling you a little bit about how it works in the UK, how local people can benefit and what our organisation does. So to start with, can I just have a show of hands, those of you that have heard about time banking and know how it works? Okay, so lots of you, good. So as you will know, then it's an asset-based philosophy which in the UK is really important to us because we believe that every person in every community has got something to offer. So it's based on the things that people can do and on their knowledge and their interests. And we're trying to change perceptions of local people who may think that they are just their users of services and actually change that so that they are actually providing something to help one another. So, as you all know, time banking, the currency is time, and we believe that everyone's hour is equal. And just to clarify how we understand time banking and the difference between time banking and volunteering, so in the UK, we feel that time banking is almost a stepping stone to traditional volunteering. So it usually attracts people that don't see themselves as volunteers. And that's because volunteering is a little bit more formal than time banking. So volunteering we see as being an activity that a person, and they would give their time to an organisation, maybe for a set number of hours, a day or a week. And time banking is much less formal than that. So time banking, we would say, is about helping one another in the community. So when we talk to local people about time banking, they may feel that actually it's volunteering. It isn't really volunteering. And when we ask people, would you help another person or a friend or a neighbour, they would 9 times out of 10 say, yes, I would help somebody. So being given time, we don't really say it's a reward, but it's a recognition of the help that one person would give another one in the community. So I just want to give you 2 examples. So the picture you can see at the top shows a chap called Dennis, who was a member of the time bank that I used to run. And Dennis was in his 60s and he couldn't read or write. He was claiming benefits, and he was referred to the time bank by the local police and social services because Dennis would claim his benefits. He would go down to the local pub and have too many drinks and cause problems in the community. And the police and social services felt that because the time bank was there and because of its asset-based philosophy, they felt that Dennis would feel a lot better if he was better connected with other people in his community. So Dennis had come and sat down with me, and the first thing that he said to me was, I can't do anything. He said, I cannot do anything, so I don't know what I can do to help other people. And it was after that that we decided he liked being outdoors, and he could mow gardens, he could help prepare, as you can see there, walls for decorating. And Dennis earned 1 hour time credit for every hour that he spent helping other people. So just an example of how he might spend his time credits. He had his hair cut because we had a a local hairdresser who was a member of the Time Bank. And he also went to see a football match because the football club was an organisational member of the Time Bank, and they were happy to provide tickets to go to see the football match in exchange for time credits. So the other thing that I want to say is that we never swap goods for time unless there's a clear time value. And one of the reasons we don't swap goods for time is because our tax office would be very interested, and there might be tax implications if we were to do that. So, for example, if I was to bake a cake for somebody, I may charge somebody 3 hours for that cake, but that was because it took me an hour to prepare, an hour to bake it, and then an hour to clear up. So that's how I would come to the 3 hours. And also, time banking would never replace paid services. So we always say that time banking is low level and informal, and that people in communities do things to the best of their ability, and that if somebody wanted a professional service that they might otherwise pay for, then that's what they have to do. They have to pay for that service. So the story that I've just told you about Dennis, you can see that he became active in the community, and after about 6 months, Dennis sat down with me and said to me that he felt he was keeping out of trouble because he said he was being kept busy, and he actually said, I feel part of the community because when I walk down the street now, people will stop and talk to me, whereas they never did before. And I left the Time Bank after running it for about 2 years when I moved home. And when I left, Dennis was being taught to read and write by a retired school teacher. So it was a really nice story of how somebody who felt totally disconnected from the community had turned their life around and that actually did feel part and a lot happier in himself. So you can see that time banking builds people's self-esteem and self-confidence. And when people start to get to know other people in their community and in their street, it creates kind of natural social and practical support networks. And those people that are lonely and isolated, it's an excellent way for them to it's not really about relationships, it's just really getting to know other people in your community and realising that there is somebody there if ever you needed some help. So in the UK, this is how time banks are run. So 90%, I would say, of time banks have got a broker or a coordinator who helps manage the activities and recruit people into the time banking network. Time banks become members of our organisation, and when they become members of our organisation, they can access all of the materials and the resources that they might need to create their time bank and make it as sustainable as it can be. So we provide training, support, access to regional networks of time banks, and we provide software, which also includes a mobile phone app. So the broker would advertise the time bank and engage people in the local community and sign them up to be part of the time bank. Now for us, it's really important that people in the community feel safe. So we try to minimise risk by giving the time banks an example of a handbook which can be tailored to suit their own needs. And the handbook contains things like a code of conduct, so local people can understand what is acceptable behaviour and what is not acceptable behaviour. It also would have a policy in there for maybe local people to understand what the process is if something went wrong when they were exchanging time with another person. And it also explains what the process would be if there was any complaints. So something that we do as an organisation is talk to the time bank about what their legal structure might be and what their governance is, so that there are decision makers within the time bank who would take responsibility for the safeguarding aspect. And also the broker would be the person that would manage the relationships between local people and make sure that each person benefits from being part of the time bank in the best possible way. So one of the first things that local people will ask is, okay, what kinds of things can we be giving and receiving as part of the Time Bank activities? And in the background there you can see it's like a cartoon questionnaire that we hand out to local people. And on that cartoon questionnaire would be something that every single person would feel that they could do to help somebody else. And on the back of that questionnaire is an explanation about time credits and how you can use them. So the time credits can be saved, they can be spent within the Time Bank network, or they can be donated to another person. They can be donated to another person, or they can be donated back to the Time Bank. So some people do an awful lot to help others in their community and feel that they might not be able to spend all of the time credits that they've earned. So it's a really nice feeling to be able to donate that time to somebody else in the community that might be of greater need. So a little bit more about what we do. We are a charity and we are a company limited by guarantee. And as I said, we are a membership organisation. So when a Time Bank joins Time Banking UK, they sign up to work to our set of working guidelines. And when they do sign up to work to our best practice guidelines, it means that they can then get access to an insurance policy. We have a really good relationship with insurance companies in the UK. And they have said that as long as Time Bank is adhering to our best practice, then they will provide an insurance policy for that Time Bank. So we have regional networks across the UK, and the regional networks enable Time Bank brokers to meet one another and share ideas about what works as well as what doesn't work. So we're learning all the time. And I have got a leaflet, which I'm going to be leaving some at the back of the room if you're interested. And that's the one at the bottom there, which is a declaration from one of our government departments, the Department of Work and Pensions, who called me in to meet with the policymakers to talk about time banking. They wanted to know what the difference was between time banking and volunteering, firstly. They wanted to know what measures we had in place to make sure that people are safe in the community, because they would be going into each other's homes and gardens. And we had a long conversation about how time banking increases people's self-esteem and self-confidence and skills. So these conversations went on for 6-8 months. It took a long time to explain all this to the policymakers, but the good news is that when we finished those conversations, they issued a statement which their lawyers had approved. And this statement went to every job centre in the UK. And it explains to the job centres that if there are people on benefits in the UK, that they can get engaged in time banking and use time banking hours to count towards their job seeking hours, which means that they feel that it's at the beginning of the pathway to paid employment. So that was really a really huge thing for us, very positive. So just so that you can see what is happening across the UK, at the moment there are 41,000 people that are exchanging time. And in addition to that, there are 5,500 organisations. Now, organisations that join time banks give and receive in exactly the same way as individuals. But they might be giving and receiving underused resources like meeting rooms or transport. Or it could be that they are giving and receiving professional services. Now, if that is the case, then they understand that that falls outside of our insurance policy, because that is a professional service, and as I said, generally time banking is not about professional services. So 3.1 million hours have been exchanged, and we know this because this data is captured by the software that we provide time banks to use. However, I would say that's probably a big underestimation of the statistics at this point, because time banks do not have to use our software. We give it to them as an option, and it's free of charge with their membership with Time Banking UK. I've put here that time banking originated in Japan. Now, that's just from our knowledge. I don't know if this is absolute fact, but I was told by our American partners that time banking in Japan had started with a kind of a pension scheme, almost, with people earning time credits and then were able to spend them when they needed to, when they were older. We know that time banking is happening across the world as a whole, and Time Banking Europe is something that I was talking about yesterday to other interested parties, because there are many countries that want to learn from the UK and also other countries that are much further forward with their time banking journey. So the diversity of time banks, it's really, really varied across the UK. And many time banks have got priority groups of people that they will engage. And sometimes that's because the demographics of the community in which they're based, and other times that's because they get funding, so for a broker or a coordinator to specifically target those groups of people. But I must say at that point that every single time bank in the UK involves the wider community, because otherwise it wouldn't work. So, for example, if you had a time bank which was only involving older people, then you wouldn't have that mix of activities to give and receive, because the older people may want very similar things. Refugees and asylum seekers is something that we are really pleased to report on, in that local authorities are looking more to using time banking as a way to change the perceptions of people in the community, because they would then see the refugees and asylum seekers as contributing in a positive way to the community rather than simply receiving the services. And then briefly, what is the link in the UK between the time banks and the health service? We have got a lot of interest from our National Health Service and our Department of Health in supporting the development of time banking networks, because not because it's providing a health service, but because it strengthens the existing services by taking the strain off of our doctors and the hospitals. So an example of one of the time banks that we had in Manchester, were helping people leave hospital when they needed to. So it was local people that were making sure that the person's house was warm, that there was food in the fridge. They would give them a lift home from hospital, because very often we've got people in our hospitals that need to leave, but the hospitals won't let them leave unless there is somebody there to look after them in their home. So local people in the community are very happy to do that. So that's just one example of how time banking can actually help underpin our health service. Something else that we're trying to do is to monetize the time banking exchanges. Now, it kind of goes against our ethos of everyone's time is equal and there is no value to time that's being exchanged. The reason we're trying to put a value and monetize the time banking exchanges is because we want the health service and our government, local authorities, to invest in time banking. And the way that they will invest in time banking is if they can see that there's a clear monetary benefit. SROI is the social return of investment. So this is basically calculating the social value that time banks create within communities. And an example of this is a time bank had received about £35,000 of funding, which was mainly to pay for a broker and a coordinator. And when we calculated the social return of investment over a period of a year, the calculation came to about £305,000. So there was a clear benefit to encourage the housing provider and the local authority to continue to invest in that time bank. Also, the leaflet that you see there, which is entitled Time Banking in Health, we've brought some of those along for those of you that are interested in taking one away with you. It's aimed at health professionals, so there are quotes in there from UK commissioners and doctors, basically about the health and well-being benefits that time banking brings people in communities. And that leaflet was particularly designed to enable older people to live in their homes for longer before going into the care system. And a new project that we have just undertaken, which is being funded by the Big Lottery, is to work with residents in care homes to improve their quality of life. So it's a kind of a shift. When people go into care homes, very often they don't have many family or friendships outside of the care home. And what we want to do is reconnect those people with their communities using time banking as a tool. So just to finish, a little bit about me. This was my time bank that I used to run a few years ago. It was an empty shop when it was first given to us to use, and everything that we got for the time bank, even the sign that you can see there, Time Bank Plus, was given by people either for time credits. So we had people painting the inside of the shop, we had a designer to design the logo, and even the signboard across the top there, everything was done for time credits. So I think it's a really good example that time banks can operate with relatively little funding as long as the communication networks are good, and that it's most definitely the way forward. So our organisation exists simply to encourage the development and growth of the time banking movement across our country. So I'm going to finish there, and thank you very much. Did anyone have any questions?
Just a second,
Sorry,
please.
sorry.
Just a second, please. I would just like to announce that the second speaker is not coming, unfortunately. Eleni or Carmen, I'm not sure who was supposed to come, is not available, which means that we have a bit more time for both of the speakers. So I would just, well, you can speak a little bit longer answering the question, which is, I think, quite interesting. And we have something like 15, 20 minutes like that. There's one thing I would like to add. Zara co-authored a book which was written, she wrote together with David Boyle, which I can really recommend it. It's about time banking in the UK in connection with the health sector. But the exact title slipped off my mind.
It's Give and Take. I've got a copy which I'm going to leave as well on the table if anyone's interested. I'm more than happy to give that away.
So that's a very good read. And then we can start, but I have to look for a microphone somewhere. There it is, okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the speech. I have a short question, because your statement at the end was time banking can work well when the community life is well. So does it mean it's actually, it improves community life, but it's also based on community life?
Yes, so it's a very local community-based initiative, and it kind of naturally strengthens and builds communities. So very often time banks will start in a community that is quite that might have some issues. So for example, my time bank was based, there was 3 estates, and 3 estates or neighbourhoods, if you like, that really didn't get on with each other. So one of the objectives of my time bank was to strengthen the relationship between older people and younger people, because the older people used to blame the young people for things going wrong in the communities, and the young people would blame the older people for things that were going wrong. So it was a really good mechanism for actually getting those people together. So yeah, it's very local, and it's really, really good to strengthen and build social capital.
Hi. May I?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, my name is Wilson Schwartz from Brazil, the University of São Paulo. And we are now developing, along with the Institute of Psychiatry of the Faculty of Medicine, an application that involves gamification and monetization to be used as support tools for drug addiction among the youth, but not only the youth, in the city of São Paulo. And this has been in the making with the Secretary of Human Rights and Citizenship of the city. So it wouldn't be really possible without the state or some form of public administration infrastructure. And my question is whether this infrastructure in the UK has coped with the challenges, or how is the policy itself and its internal logic related to this public sphere that seems to be threatened by many economic and political trends these days?
So do you mean more about what our processes and procedures are?
Regulatory issues, as well as funding opportunities or agreements.
So it's kind of, we've formalised this very informal way of operating and exchange. And the reason we've had to formalise it is because there is this very big question around safety and safeguarding. So when you have people, as you were saying, that people might have addiction issues, or they might be homeless, or they've got high support needs, one of the first questions from the supporters, like local authorities, are what steps are you taking to make sure that those people are safe? There again, you might have two vulnerable people exchanging time with one another. So we have checks in the UK called DBS checks. They used to be called CRB, which was the Criminal Records Bureau, which we provide, all time banks, we provide that service if people do need to be checked for any criminal records. But we feel that we have to have these processes in place, because if we didn't, it's almost like we won't be able to get that funding to pay for brokers. And when we have a broker that's in charge of a time bank, it's almost it's a quick way to develop and implement that network. There are time banks in the UK that are not run by paid members of staff or paid brokers, but they grow much more slowly. They might not be then able to afford an insurance policy, so then all the risk is not managed through those processes. And those time banks then would ask people to sign a declaration to say that they get involved at their own risk. And while we have a platform and a software platform, no one is allowed to use the software platform until they have undergone this joining process to minimise risk. So our software is not like Facebook, for example, where anyone can use it. It's given to the time banks, and local people would be given a username and password to actually access that software and mobile phone app. And they would only get given that information after they've joined the time bank and gone through that process.
More questions?
Hi, and just one question leading on from that, what you've just mentioned then, and then a separate question. But with the sort of DBS checks and sort of identity checks, is that on absolutely everybody that joins, or is it just people that you perceive as being vulnerable then?
There are certain criteria that you can only check somebody that fits that particular criteria set out by the Disclosure and Barring Service, DBS service. So no, the answer is we do not check everybody. Mm-hmm. Only those people that need checking. So percentage-wise, I've got Nikki here, who's head of our membership, who does all the DBS checks. If you had a time bank of like 200 people, I would say maybe 20, or not even 20 people would be checked, DBS checked.
But you would know the identity of that other 180 people? Like, do they have to provide ID or something? Yeah. So we get references from every person that would join a time bank. Mm. So it's basically just to prove that person is who they say they are, and lives in that local community. So, but we actually find that very few things ever go wrong within a time bank network because people are all living in the same community. Yeah. And then just the second one, was there any issues with sort of the quality of the time credits like issued? I'm not saying could someone be malicious and just sort of say, oh, I've issued a lot of credits and they're not really that valuable, not very good quality credits in a way, or is that any problems with?
I don't know what you mean with when you say the quality.
Say if it was me and somebody who were being malicious and I just said that person give me 8 credits and vice versa, like, in theory, even though those credits weren't actually timed, it was kind of it's like I'm sort of creating ones out of nothing, like if you understand what I mean.
So that nothing is, that we don't have printed time credits, so they're all kind of like virtual. But if somebody does a time exchange with someone else, when they log those hours on our computer system, so if I exchanged 3 hours with you and I would say that I've exchanged 3 hours, you would get a message to say, Sarah has noted she's engaged with an activity for 3 hours with you. If you disputed that, then you wouldn't approve that transaction. And if you disputed it, it would come back and get flagged up as being an issue for discussion, and then it needs to be sorted.
And that's the point of the broker and the sort of third...
So sometimes that's the point of the broker, but also now we've got this interactive software, it enables people to talk to one another rather than it all having to go through a broker.
Oh, okay.
More questions?
Thanks for the presentation. And what about the dimension of the community? You was talking about the relevance of the small community to enforce the ties between people, but I saw on your maps there was London. How would you decide boundaries and who is inside and outside, and what is changing depending by the size? Thanks.
So if you've got a city, so an example of that is one of our counties in Surrey. The county council commissioned Timebanking UK to help develop a time banking network across the entire county. Also, similar has happened in London. But what happens is that we go into the communities and talk to local people, and where there is activity, hubs of activity, so there might be, say, 100 people in one community that want to be part of a time banking network, that can be a standalone time bank. So across the entire county of Surrey, you might have 10 or a dozen time banks happening in all different areas, but they're all connected with each other by using our software. So people can exchange time credits not only in their local community, but also between time banks. But things have to happen on a local level, because our evidence shows that the moment people have to travel to get to another person's home, then it starts to break down. So basically you can have networks of time banks over large geographical areas, but there's lots of hubs of activities happening, all connected with the software. So it's still on a local level.
More questions? And I have a question myself. This is similar to the one raised before. You really have a double entry bookkeeping. Did I understand that correctly? Somebody gets a credit and the other person normally gets a debit,
yep.
Right?
Yeah.
How does it work if a time bank comes to an end? That's what I heard, what happens, because funding is coming to an end. Do the credits, are they transferred to Timebank UK, or is it just what happens with the credits?
What we try to do is that when and you're absolutely correct that time banks do close. We're trying to learn from what happens there and what has gone wrong. So sometimes a time bank will close and they will let us know. They are made inactive on our system, so on our map, a time bank will look as if they no longer exist. But we will have conversations with those people who are running the time bank or who support the time bank to encourage them to look at other ways and alternatives of actually managing the activities. If a time bank does close, though, and the coordinator is no longer in post, we have found that whilst it's not on our system any longer, that actually local people continue to help one another in that community. So there is no expiry date to a time credit. They can swap those time credits within another time bank, or we find that actually local people would think, maybe we can just do this on our own. Maybe we can just do this and use the time banking software without the need for a paid broker. And we know that that is still happening in many, many places. So again, the statistics that I showed is only the ones that we pick up from using our software, not necessarily what is actually happening out there. So the answer is there is no expiry date. Time credits can be used to interchange between other time banks, but they don't come back to Timebanking UK.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Enrique, and I'm coming from Spain. Do you have any joint venture with companies, with councils, in order to exchange time hours with tickets for going to the cinema, theater, music, or exchanging for gifts?
Yeah, so we operate 3 models of time banking. So whilst we feel that our specialism is individual exchanging time with individuals, we also encourage the swapping of time between individuals and organisations to other organisations. So organisations that swap resources with individuals is exactly as you said. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The time bank that I used to run, I had about 65 organisations that were members of my time bank. One of those was the local cinema. One of those was the local theatre, the football club, as I already mentioned. And all of those organisations wanted to be part of the time banking network, not just to give tickets, but they actually wanted something in return. So there was that reciprocity happening between the organisations as well as individuals. So the example with the cinema, so they would give us 30 guest passes, so like 30 free tickets every month. And then we could swap those tickets with time credits for individuals in the community. And what the cinema wanted in return was to, every week I had a really good relationship with the local press, the reporters. So they would ring me up to say, can we have the latest story on how somebody in the local community has earned their time credits and how they swapped them for a cinema ticket to the local cinema. So it was a press publicity that the cinema was getting in return. And the theatre gave us, actually there was a lot of theatre tickets, but the criteria was that they would only give us 24 hours notice. They would only give us 24 hours notice because they knew they could not sell those seats, and they wanted to have every seat in their theatre filled with people. So it wasn't that they were making a loss, they just wanted to have a full house in the theatre. Strangely enough, they wanted absolutely no publicity whatsoever because they didn't want people to know that they couldn't sell the tickets. So we found that quite amusing because the people that ended up in the theatre sitting on very expensive seats were the people in the community who had maybe the least money, which was actually quite amusing. One of our most recent organisations are called Cadw, which is in Wales, who approached us to say, we would really like your Time Bank members to come and start visiting our castles and historical sites across Wales. And the reason we want your people, they said, to come and visit our sites is because we feel then they might not otherwise do so because it's maybe quite expensive. So we had a conversation with them and we figured that if somebody helps another person in their community for 7 hours, then they could swap those 7 hours for an all-day ticket to go to see one of the castles or historic sites. So what Cadw wanted in return was they wanted a story from individuals that went to visit their sites on how they earned those 7 hours by helping another person in the community. So for them, it was basically an opportunity for people to go and visit that might never normally do so. So yes, there is an awful lot of organisations that do get involved in our time banks.
Hi Sarah. I want to talk about the monetisation issue. How are you going to go about doing that? And how are you going to protect the sort of hour-for-hour value when you may need to work out that certain activities cost more in order to make the cost-benefit analysis work?
Yeah. So we're working with there's an organisation called HACT in the UK, which is the Housing Association, just trying to think something. Anyway, it's a tool that they have created which monetises social value. So, for example, if somebody, as part of their, after being involved in a time banking network, said that they felt less depressed, then they have actually got a value, a monetary value of how much that is worth, the social value. So that is how we're actually calculating. Because HACT is recognised in the UK as being a calculator for social value, we feel we can use it in that way. The other way that we are monetising time banking activities is a little bit more clear and more robust. So things like people that are visiting the GP, their doctor less. There's a clear cost saving there. And also things like if somebody leaves hospital a day early than they need to, the cost of the NHS for somebody staying in hospital overnight is between like £300 and £400 a night. So we can clearly put a value on that. So the value is like cost savings to the health service. But also there's a cost saving, as I said, like the social value. So HACT is the tool that we're currently using. I mean, it's very, very difficult to evidence. And also we have encountered, there are many time banks and certainly time bank members that don't want to have their activities monetised. But if we are to grow the movement in the UK, we have to be really clear. So I'm currently writing a business proposal for organisations which sets out very clearly about, for example, time banking can be used for employability and what the cost savings might be there. So if you keep in touch, I can send you that when it's ready so you can have a look.
I would suggest to just allow one more question, just in order to give the next speaker also the same share of the extra time. It's my proposal. I think that's fair.
Second question, but it's a pleasure just to hear you. Do you have any scheme or any time bank which is specialized in elderly people?
In elderly people?
Elderly people, yeah.
I would say nearly every time bank involves older people, but we've got lots of time banks that may be working with like care homes or supported housing schemes, so specifically engaging with older people. And I think what's really interesting is when you've got older people and also people with long-term health conditions or disabilities, to actually see how to see their confidence increase when they realise they have got something of value, so they've got a lifetime of knowledge and experience that they can share with other people and earn time credits in that way. Because very often older people will think that they have got nothing to give. And what we want to do is to make it really easy for older people to ask for help, and very often they find that quite difficult. So one of the things that we do is give people time credits for the time that they spend listening about how the time bank works and actually going through that joining process to actually give them some time to get started. But also explain to older people that the time bank itself will have time credits. So if they feel very uncomfortable, for example, by going into deficit, if they needed help first before they could earn time credits to pay back, that the time bank can actually give them time credits, almost gift them time credits if they need to. But after they've been involved for a while, they then realise actually there is lots that they can do as part of a time banking network. And there's this kind of misconception as well that older people need lots of help. So I can remember visiting a very elderly lady who's quite disabled, and I went in to talk to her about the time bank, and I said, oh, it's great that we can come and do your shopping, we can help you with your housework, we can do this, we can do that. And she said, well, but then that means I will just sit in my chair 24 hours a day and not do anything and just basically die here. She said, if you want to do something, Sarah, to help me, she said, get somebody to help me leave this house, go shopping. It might take me hours and hours and hours, but if someone could come with me, I don't like going on the bus because I fall over. So if someone can take me to the shops and help me up the steps and this. And actually I realised that that's what people want to do. So she didn't know what to do in return, but she actually enjoyed making cards, handmade gift cards. So that's what she used to do in her home, and each one would take her an hour to make. So they would go to the time bank and people would swap their time credits for one of her cards. So that was the time exchange there. But it's interesting. I do encounter lots of people that wonder how those that might be more disadvantaged or elderly can actually earn time credits, and it's quite surprising that there are lots and lots of ways that they can. But yes, there are lots of time banks that involve older people.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah, for this interesting